Let's take a look, Be'ezras Hashem, at the first teaching on the page. And the Berditchover has been explaining the first pasuk, Vayakhel-Pikudei HaMishkan, Mishkan HaEdos. These are the accountings of the Mishkan HaEdos, the Mishkan of testimony, Asher Pukat al Pi Moshe, that was counted on account of Moshe Rabbeinu. Please, if you're joining the call, please remember to mute. Thank you. Avodas HaLeviyim Biyadi Samar ben Aaron HaKohen. This was the work of the Leviyim that was undergone under the authority of Isamar, the son of Aaron HaKohen. So the Berditchover has like 10 different explanations of this first pasuk, and this is one of the first ones. And he says like this, Oyivur. He wants to address the following concept of how it's possible that we can count the Mishkan. What do we know about counting, right? If you want to make sure that you have a minion in the room, right? We're not allowed to count things, each thing on its own. It's not a good sign, not a good siman. So says the Berditchover, Oyivur eile Pikudei HaMishkan Mishkan HaEdos Asher Pukat al Pi Moshe V'hinei Amru Chachamenu Zal. Chazal tell us De'ena bracha shiur b'davar hasafur v'hashakol. Blessing does not rest on something that is shakol and safur. Right? Anything that's counted, anything that is calculated, is not going to be able to be a kli for bracha. So the question is fairly obvious. Over here you see that the Melechas HaMishkan is done al pi cheshbon, and it is calculated, and there's an accounting that's made. What's going on? But over here, obviously this wasn't somehow like causing the Mishkan to be diminished in any way. On the contrary, over here, it seems that the accounting of the Mishkan preceded the putting together of the Mishkan and allowing the Mishkan to become a place where the Shekhinah rested. So how do we understand that? So the Hineksiv, he quotes a pasuk in Shir Hashirim, and the pasuk says, Einayich brechus becheshbon. Your eyes are inecha, I'm not sure who's speaking, but either we are saying to Hashem or Hashem is speaking to us. I have to look up the pasuk. But something's telling me it's a necha brechus becheshbon. Your eyes, we say to Hashem, kiviyachol, are like well springs of the city that was called Cheshbon. Brechus becheshbon, like deep pools of water in the city of Cheshbon. What does that mean? So Vihine says the Berditchover, why is it that we cannot count things, and that when we count something, it's not with mazel? Because v'hinei shirish ayin ra'a. What does ayin hara mean? Look at my Bilam. Ayin hara is rooted in Bilam. Fascinatingly enough, we know that Bilam was blind, right? He was no'uma gever shesum ayin. Physically, there was something wrong with his eyes, but somehow he was hired by Balak to go ahead and cast an ayin hara on Klal Yisrael. You looked up the source. It was Enecha.
It's a nayich.
Oh, it's a nayich. Okay.
It's also at least how the pasuk vows. It's breichot, as in.
Brechus, yeah, pools.
Yeah.
No, Enayich brechus becheshbon. Okay. V'inei shirish ayin ra gamay Bilam. Ayin hara is rooted in Bilam. The bechol makom shenasan einav. Wherever he looked, hayamara ba'isa hadavar. There was a curse or me'era in that place where he looked. Machmas taharasha histaka ba'isa hadavar hifresay misharish ha'alyin shel makar ha'chayim. Because wherever this wicked person looked, the way that he looked at things, in his subjective perception, cut that thing off from its spiritual source. He was not experiencing the world in a conscious way. So when he looked around the world and he looked at people and he looked at things, he saw them as objective realities in and of themselves, divorced, disconnected from their spiritual source. And the way that we look at the world has an impact on the world. So, Mimela says the Berditchover, that's an ayin hara. When because of a consciousness, which is an incredibly powerful thing, that's perceiving an element within the created world in a particular way, that's going to have an impact on that thing, just by virtue of the way that we perceive it. So Bilam looks at Klal Yisrael, and he cuts them off from their shirish. Machmas shehu la'ut achar oisa hadavar, because he's only looking at the outside. Only the outside is precious in the person's eyes, right? I mean, that's the most classic case of ayin hara. which usually comes from jealousy, right? That's why any time a person's saying something, nice or admirable, you always say kanai nahara, right? Kan, which is Yiddish for there shouldn't be kain ayin hara. There shouldn't be any ayin hara here. Why? Because ayin hara is the result of jealousy. Jealousy automatically means that the person that's looking at the thing that this other person has that they don't have, obviously, in that moment, they're disconnecting that thing from God. Because if they were looking at thing in the context of the divine, so then there's no jealousy, because obviously I'm not meant to have it. This that a person looks at something that someone else has and wants it already memela means that in that moment they're not in an expanded state of consciousness. They're obviously in a constricted state of consciousness where they're only looking at themselves and they're not looking at the truth, which is that obviously this thing or experience or circumstance that person has is meant for them to have and it's not meant for me to have. Once a person looks with jealousy, is they're cutting that thing off from its supernal source. And that can have an impact on that particular person or place or thing. Obviously, in that moment, the person is not looking toward the godliness in that experience. However, Yisrael, when it comes to Klal Yisrael, Ksiv, Einayich Breiches Becheshbon. Sorry, so it's Hashem praising Klal Yisrael, saying that Einayich Breiches Becheshbon, our eyes are Breiches Becheshbon, like the well springs of the city of Cheshbon. But what that means is, Af Bedavar Sheyesh Becheshbon, even something that is calculated. Ubaleda minyan umispar, and you approach to know what is the accounting. You want to really look at things specifically. Afal pikein inamazik istaklas hazeh. This kind of counting is not damaged, even though generally speaking it's true that bracha does not settle on a thing that is counted. When it's tzaddik, who's the pinnacle, the ideal ish ha-Yisraeli, when it's tzaddik counts, on the contrary. Machmashe ish ha-Yisraeli in an ideal sense, and it's very similar lashon to Likutei Moharan Torah Aleph, where the Rebbe says over there, right, that ish ha-Yisraeli tzarich tamid le'istak b'seichel sheyesh b'chol davar, uses the same terminology. Interestingly enough, the ish ha-Yisraeli b'chol davar asher roya, any place that he looks, u'mistakel, and gazes and sees, az roya b'koyach haboyrei asher nimtza b'y. He's able to perceive the koach, the strength, the force, the power, the presence of the Creator that is nimtza, boy, that is to be found reflected in that particular thing. The kivan shemadbek hadavar ahu l'sharshai. So mamelav, that's the way that he looks at things. Automatically, he connects it to its shirish, to its root. Az b'ri'iyah halazu, on the contrary, this kind of eyesight, mamshech bracha v'shefa mimikar elyon aladavar ahu, that causes for there to be an open channel, and megadoses of spiritual energy are being able to flood down into that entity. Now again, just on a deeper level, counting in this context is always a precarious thing to do. Because to count is already to enter into the world of multiplicity, which is already a realm of concealment vis-a-vis the singular presence of the divine. Hashem is one, right? Echad yachid umiyuchad, and not echad b'minyan. Hashem is not one because he's the first of many. Chas v'shalom, Hashem is called yachid, right? He's the only one. So when we live, as we do, in this physical world, in this human experience that we're having right now, and we look at things and we want to enumerate them and count them, we run the grave risk in so doing, because we're right now in the realm of concealment, because we can look at differentiation and say this is a chair, and the chair is not the cup, and the cup is not the guitar, and the guitar is not the ceiling, and so on. So then already you're in a realm of concealment. Already you run the risk in that counting to say, well, everything here, from the fact that there is everything here, is masking the singular presence of the divine, who could arguably be hidden within the manifold manifestations, revelations that he created, each of which is different. And so that's why counting is a dangerous thing, because you can so easily fall into the trap of really looking at this reality and seeing things for how they appear on the surface, and to say that is what they are, without being able to penetrate more deeply and to realize, no, there's just a one that is manifesting in all of these various ways, as we're going to see. When Klal Yisrael count, when tzaddik counts, on the contrary, that tzaddik is able to realize that lehepech, there's no greater place to be for the purpose of encountering the singular divine than in this world of manifold revelation. It is specifically here, specifically in the world of Malchus, specifically in the world of Midas, specifically in a world of color and sound and time and space and all of the dimensions of the human functionality. Daika, here I can encounter HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the fullest way, because literally everywhere I go, I bump into the presence of Hashem. Sometimes I bump into the Midah of Chesed, that's the Yachid manifesting himself in this way. Sometimes I encounter the Midah of Din, that's the Yachid, that's the singular entity, manifesting in another way. And so it is throughout the whole spectrum of human experience that Tzaddik utilizes this world of forms to be able to perceive the singular essence that manifests in all the forms, the face, so to speak, behind every mask. Right?
You're adding the word tzaddik, no?
Yes.
Because he says there is Israel.
Ideally.
That means that anyone.
Ideally. The reason I'm adding the word tzaddik is because the Gemara that he quoted about not counting, right, in a bracha, Sholet B'davar Samoi, is speaking about Jews, right? So you cannot say that every Jew is capable of this. He's speaking about ideally, right? Because we see that we don't count things, right? So it means Moshe Rabbeinu is on that madriga. We're about to talk about Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is on that madriga, and this is the madriga for which we strive. When a person is living in that conscious state, then what he counts connects things to the shirish. Yeah.
But surely this just means about counting people. Like, you're not allowed to count people, but surely you can count objects. It's so important to.
Why is it important to count objects?
I feel like it would be very useful in day-to-day life to be able to count things.
It would be. The Gemara that he's quoting is speaking not about people, it's speaking about objects, but over there, it's speaking about, let's say, a person, for example, has a crop that grows, right? And this was very prevalent back then. And they reap all the crops and they're bringing them in. The Gemara says, don't make an exact accounting. Because once you make an exact accounting, then you limit it to what you counted.
Like,
right?
you're not allowed to count money.
Yeah, something like that, because bracha is not sholet on something like that. So there's a separate thing about counting people, and that's true, and that's why we use psukim or songs or brachas or different things to count people. But when a person is looking at objects, there's also that aspect. And here he's explaining why. Because a person can get so sucked in to the physical experience of counting many that you cut the manyness off from the unity that's supposed to be manifesting through it. However, Hashem created the world for the purpose not of confusing us and trapping us in a world of separation. We learned that right in our Tuesday morning classes about Adam and Chava. The point wasn't that Chava should just walk away from Adam. Hashem wants that in this world of separation, we should turn back around and connect to Him. Tzaddikim do that. All of the rest of us strive to do that. And we learn from tzaddikim who teach us how to have eyes like Einei Hashem el tzaddikim, godly eyes, right? Eyes that see God. Eyes of a holy drunk, like Rav Shlomo said, and I mentioned this, right? That a unholy drunk sees one and he just sees double, and a holy drunk sees two and all he sees is one, right? That's the holy drunk. We should be with eyes that look around the world, and whatever it is that we see, it's just the echad yachid miyuchad. Like the Berditchover Rav himself told Hashem, he was overheard speaking to Hashem one time, and he said, Hashem, you and I are playing hide and seek, and I find you everywhere. Right, I everywhere I go, and that was the famous poem that he composed. It was called Adudala. Adudala in Yiddish, du means you, and he goes through a whole very lengthy poem about all of the different places and experiences that a person can have, and it keeps on coming back to the refrain Aye emse'eka, where might I find you? Va'aye loy emse'eka, but where don't I find you? Right, and that was the Berditchover's thing. Do. Everywhere I look, there's you. Right, everything that I see is you. That was the tzaddik, and that's what he's describing over here. Okay, v'zeh shekasav, and that's what the pasuk means in Shir Hashirim. Einayich brechos. She'einayich Klal Yisrael tzaddikim who are manifesting the ideal ruach of emunah, nase k'may brechos u'mayanos hashpa'a af b'davar cheshbon. Brechos means like a wellspring. It's like a channel. It's like a flood of water. Says Hashem to Klal Yisrael, to the tzaddikim, einayich, the way that you look at the world in your holy way, to see Hashem in everything. On the contrary, becheshbon, when you make calculations, brechos. Not only doesn't that cause ayin hara because you're cutting things off from their source, on the contrary, it's with your eyesight that you stitch reality back together. With your conscious perception, you're megala the Shechina. The Shechina is already there. Objectively, from the Shechina's perspective, you can't hide the Shechina or reveal the Shechina. The Shechina is already there. It's a subjective perspective. To the extent that all of humanity recognizes Hashem, Hashem is revealed. To the extent that all of humanity ignores Hashem, Hashem is concealed. Is Hashem revealed or concealed? It depends. On who? On us. It depends on the way that we look at the world. Says Hashem to Klal Yisrael, very beautiful interpretation. Einayich, your way of looking at the world, brechos becheshbon. You cause bracha to flood into reality on account of the cheshbon that you make. V'zeh shekasov, and that's why the pasuk tells us, Vayakhel-Pikudei HaMishkan. Yes, Moshe Rabbeinu counted the Mishkan, and it wasn't despite Moshe counting the Mishkan that the Shechina dwelled on it. No, that was the whole point. We know that shiur de mashkanot kitziyur de masabereshis. The Zohar tells us that Mishkan was a microcosm of the whole entire world. Right? The Gemara in Brachas, Yedea B'Tzalel, the Tsar of Osia Shebehem Nibur Shemayim V'Aretz. B'Tzalel needed to know all of the Kabbalistic permutations of all of the letters of Hashem's names, each of which is a vessel, a vehicle for different spiritual energy that was used to create the whole world. B'Tzalel put that into the Mishkan. That's why the Mishkan you needed, and we're going to see this in a minute. You needed gold and silver and copper and all the colors and all the different textures and different kalim. All of that was reflective of the reality that we're surrounded by, that's made of manifold different objects and aspects and items. Then all of the different pieces are brought to Moshe Rabbeinu, and the Mishkan, Shechina, correlates to the sphere of Malchus, our physical world, and the experience of this manifold, experience of differentiated energies. That's what the Mishkan is. Kol nediv liba yaviyaha. Every individual needs to bring their own contribution. Then they all come to Moshe, who's the tzaddik, and then v'haya Mishkan echad. The whole Mishkan becomes one. Says the Berditchover, how did the Mishkan become one? Yes, Vayakhel Moshe as a Mishkan. Moshe put it together. But the Berditchover says deeper. The Mishkan became one because Moshe Rabbeinu counted it with the eyes of a tzaddik. Every single piece that he looked at, all he saw was the Echad Yachid Miyuchad. That's all he saw. It was that consciousness that allowed the Shechina to dwell in the Mishkan. So reminding me, coming up to Pesach, it's a famous story also with this tzaddik, with the Berditchover on the topic, where the Berditchover, of course, Seder night, hosted all the different chevra from the city. Many different kinds of people would come, some big tzaddikim, the prominent chassidim, and some very simple Jews, some maybe very illiterate Jews who really didn't know anything. And all they knew, they were just copying what other people were doing at the Seder. They're just looking in the Haggadah and trying their best to keep along with everyone else. So one year he had this very simple Jew, but a very confident and sincere Yid. And when they came to the Arba Banim, the part of the Haggadah that describes the four sons, so the way that the text says it is Keneged Arba Banim Dibra Torah, right? The Torah spoke to four different kinds of children: Echad Chacham, Echad Rasha, Echad Tam, and Echad She'en Yodea Lishol. Right? That's the text. Right? One was a Chacham, one was a Rasha, one was a Tam, one was a She'en Yodea Lishol. So this Yid is sitting there reading the Haggadah. And when he gets to this part, he says, Keneged Arba Banim Dibra Torah. And he goes like, takes his hand, he covers his eyes, he says, Echad Chacham. Right? Like say Kriya Shema. Echad Rasha. Echad. Everybody's laughing, because when he's in shul and he hears people say Echad, that's how he hears them say it. So he thought that that's what you do anytime you see Echad. And they were laughing at him. It's like a joke, right? It's just, that's not. And the Berditchover got very serious. And he said, no, he's right. That's the right way to say it. Because what he's doing is realizing that the Baal Haggadah meant to say there are all different kinds of people in the world, but Echad Chacham. The Chacham contains godliness. Echad Rasha. The Rasha, in his experience, contains a spark of godliness. Echad Tam. And Echad She'eni Yadei L'Shal. Yes, he's saying it the right way. Right? That's the consciousness of Moshe Rabbeinu. V'haya Mishkan Echad. Right? The Mishkan became one because Moshe Rabbeinu looked at all of these different materials, all these different contributions, the encapsulation of so many different ritzonos and desires of so many different kinds of people, and all he saw was the Echad Yachid Umiyuchad. In so doing, he allowed the singular presence of the Shekhinah to dwell within this hodgepodge collaboration of all these different materials that came together to form the Mishkan.
It's interesting because I never thought before but the passage just says Vayomishkan Echad. It's not Vayomishkan Hoya Echad or Osa Echad. It just like
it was. All of a sudden it was
like,
Echad.
It always was regardless of
He revealed the Achdus within it. That's what I'd say. If you don't mind grabbing the door. Okay, unbelievable. So says the Berditchover Zeh Shekasav Eile Pikudei HaMishkan. This is what we mean when it says Eile Pikudei HaMishkan. The Mishkan Shenimne Kol Davar Kam upon, and that's why Vayakhel-Pikudei, they make an accounting of everything, and the clothing of the Kohanim and the Kohen Gadol and everything needs to be counted and seen, the kalim and the dimensions and all the different tapestries. V'nasa b'cheshben, yes, it was specifically done with an accounting. And he says, first, even so, the blessing and Shekhinah dwelled on it. But he says, Va'adarabba, not just like even so, blessing dwelled in it, it's much deeper than that. Va'adarabba, on the contrary, Shahaya Haminyan Sayrich Gevaya, it's much deeper than that. Pass the sheet down, there are sheets over here for you. We're at the end of the first paragraph. Shahaya Haminyan Sayrich Gevaya. On the contrary, it isn't, again, despite this, that Moshe Rabbeinu counted all the parts of the Mishkan, that the Mishkan was able to reflect godliness. On the contrary, it was specifically through the counting, when Moshe Rabbeinu counted the Mishkan, because he looked at every part and saw the godliness within it, that is precisely what allowed the singular presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to dwell in the Mishkan. That was counted, but it has to be al pi Moshe. It was done by the hand of Moshe Rabbeinu. That Moshe Rabbeinu lived in a state of glue, in a state of attachment. He was glued to the divine. Right? That's what dvekus is, devek. That's how Moshe Rabbeinu lived his whole life. And connected to the realm of elevated kedusha va'adarabba al yadai nitaisif bracha. It was specifically on account of Moshe Rabbeinu making an accounting of Moshe Rabbeinu, making an accounting of all the parts of the Mishkan. That is what caused the Shekhinah to dwell in it. Very, very powerful and important teaching from the Berditchover. Okay, let's move along to the second teaching. And he says again, Ayevuar, another take on the pasuk that in its full length, I'll just read the whole thing, right, which we started with, Eile Pikudei HaMishkan Mishkan Eidos, Asher Pukad Al Pi Moshe, and he says, Avodas HaLevim Biadi Samar Ben Aaron HaKohen, again, that was overseen under the authority of the Leviim, Biad Isamar Ben Aaron HaKohen, who was appointed to oversee the construction. Says Moshe Rabbeinu, Eile Pikudei HaMishkan V'chulei Avodas HaLevim Biadi Samar Ben Aaron HaKohen, Haklal Hu. Says the Berditchover Rav, the following is a very important principle to remember. Hashem is constantly pouring down on Am Yisrael kindness and compassion. But what about sometimes, chas v'shalom, we should never hear from such a thing, sometimes something bad can happen to Klal Yisrael. It is just part and parcel of a bigger process. It's one step toward a toiva, toward something beautiful that's going to unfold. If it has no productive purpose to move history along and to contribute to the master plan that's completely beyond us, but one day will be right in front of our eyes, then Hashem is not bringing that Ra on Klal Yisrael. That's it. That's just the very, very basic formulation. Whatever Hashem does, l'tav avid, especially for His precious people. Ki ha'ikar ma she'Hashem yisbarach sheleach ra liYisrael, hu k'dei she'achar kach yavim mizeh tov liYisrael. Anything negative that happens to the nation or each of us individually, it's part of a process. Something good is coming. Something good is coming down the pipeline. V'zeu remez. So with this, he wants to interpret this pasuk. We know that ki Levi miramez al midas mishpat. We know that Levi is the midah of din. Kohen represents chesed. Kohen is the energy of kindness. Levi is the energy of din. That's why the Leviim, in addition to singing, and nigun is also misitra de Levi, is an aspect of gevura, because in order to sing a melody, it has to be strung together with hyper-particular notes, right? It's not chaotic, right? Music is extremely mathematical. You may even plot it on a graph if anybody happens to be wearing a shirt of some kind. But music is specifically very precise, right? It's mathematical. What else did the Leviim do in the Beis HaMikdash? They sang and they guarded the doors, right? They were Shomer Pesach. Memela, the Levi is the energy of Gevura, Din. Kohen is Chesed. Kohen is Chesed, right? The Kohen's whole job is to help people with their karbanas, to be mekarev them, right? To Ebim Talmidei Shal Aaron, right? Which is Oiv Shalom, V'Oiv Shalom, Oihev Esabriya. The whole thing of a Kohen is overflowing with Chesed. Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. Right? Just like we have Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Avram is the aspect of a Kohen, Yitzchak is the aspect of a Levi, and then Yaakov is the aspect of Yisraelim, who are the energy in the center, in the middle. So it says the Berditchover, Levi is merabez al midas mishpat. There's a remez of a Levi which hints to the midah of din. The kohen, like we just said, remez al midas chesed. Kohanim is the midah of kindness. V'zah remez avodas haLeviim hu midas hamishpat. Right, avodas haLeviim in this context is going to mean, it's going to communicate to us difficult moments, whether nationally or personally. And Hashem is telling us, I want to let you know, Klal Yisrael, avodas haLeviim, whatever you go through in life that's an aspect of the Leviim, which is din, I want to let you know, v'zeh ha'remez, ki Levi ramez amidas rib, v'zeh ha'remez, avodas midas hamishpat, biyad Isamar ben Aaron HaKohen. It is literally in the hands of Isamar ben Aaron HaKohen. Kohen is chesed. Din is only in the context of chesed. Ki gavar aleinu, what we experience to be gvura, is chazdai. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a plan. Hashem has a plan, and the plan is good. Hashem only created the world for chesed. People forget this. Like Hashem created the world so to damn us to hell eternally. Like, it's ridiculous. Hashem created the world as an act of love, as a freely chosen act to confer His kindness and His compassion and His adoration on His creations. That's the whole purpose of the Bria. Now, anything negative is within that context. And says the Berditchover, that's right here in this pasuk. Avodas haLeviim, any experience of din is biyad Itamar ben Aaron HaKohen, is within the context, the purview of midas haChesed. It's only going to come upon a person with the aspect of din if it's in the context of a greater chesed that's going to unfold sometime in the future, hopefully in the near future. Midas hadin accomplishes whatever it needs to accomplish. But if there wasn't ultimately a midah of chesed underlying all of this, the midah of din would never ever be activated. The midah of din is one layer of the way Hashem reveals Himself. But like we learned, the chaver from Hasma over there, right, in our course, right, what's at the core? We said at the core is love. There are many ways that Hashem reveals Himself. We learned in the curriculum, right? Many ways that Hashem reveals Himself. But at the essence of it all, what powers it fundamentally, like we learned, the Kodesh HaKodashim, remember, is the Kruvim. And the Kruvim is Ava Atsuma, right? Is this unbelievably powerful love. And then in concentric circles, everything else, right, is revealed. There's the Beis HaMikdash, and then there's Yerushalayim, and then there's Eretz Yisrael, and then there's Chutz La'aretz, right, which is the aspect of the hiddenness of Hashem, midah of din. But what powers it? What's at the core? Is chesed. Biyad Isamar ben Aaron HaKohen. Right. Right. Im lo yeh midas chesed, as ein midas mishpat oise mishpatei. V'zeu haremez, and this is also hinted to in the words Eile Pikudei HaMishkan. Ki HaMishkan roi mizalam takas adinim. The Mishkan is the sweetening of judgment. It's the revelation within a world of concealment of Hashem's presence. It's the sweetening of this world of apparent multiplicity, like we learned in the previous piece, by revealing the Echad Yachid Umiyuchad specifically through all the different masks. Tainu am takas dinami Yisrael. We brought karbanas. We did avodah hukamai avodah salavim biyadi samar and Aaron HaKohen. That's mamish, the whole inyan of what it means to live in a world of Levi. That's in a context of Kohen. Pikudei HaMishkan. The whole tikkun of the Mishkan, which is the tikkun of Olam Hazeh, which is to live in a world of differentiation and the concealment of godliness. Gewalt. I mean, that's a strong experience of Levi. Right? That's Gevura. We need to realize, no, again, the only reason Hashem put us down here is to bring us closer to Him than ever before. Is to enable us to perceive His oneness in a way that in some sense, while we were still a part of Him, B'koyach, we never could have perceived it. So yes, the whole experience of the Mishkan, which is a microcosm for the whole world, is Avodas Halavim Biyadi Samar ben Aaron HaKohen. And that's why the Mishkan and its tikkun is discussed specifically in the context of this fixing. Din, in the context of chesed. Living in a world of different pieces, different parts. I don't perceive godliness, Hashem is hidden, for the purpose of being able to come face to face with Him in a way that I never could have prior to the world being created. Understand? That's why these two things are in the same pasuk right next to each other, yeah. If you don't mind passing the water also. Yeah.
But if the world down here, we can connect to Hashem in a way that we never could while we're still part of Him, then why do we say that we so long to go to Olam HaBa when really the connection here seems like it's much greater than up there? It's
an excellent question. We were just speaking about this maybe last week or a different week recently when we said that's the tension in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, the very same Mishnah, which on the one hand says that Yafa Sha'achas Karas Ruach Olam HaBa, which is what you're quoting, just a whiff of Olam HaBa is much greater than the whole Olam Hazeh. And that same Mishnah says Yafa Sha'achas Torah Umitzvahs, or Torah Masim Torah Tshuva, Torah Masim Tabim, but Olam Hazeh Mikol Chai Olam HaBa. 1 hour of serving Hashem in this world is in a sense greater than the whole reality in the next. The way to reconcile the two is likely that on account of the neshama coming down to this world, then when it goes back to Olam HaBa, it has already had that experience, right? This is what's called in Sfarim, especially Sifrei Chabad, it's called Yerida Letzorech Aliyah. It's coming down into this world for the purpose of then having its Aliyah. So meaning, it isn't that in Olam HaBa you go back to, sort of where you came from. Having had the experience in this world, there's a separate, special element.
So great because it's earned it.
Because it's earned, because we're able to discern different aspects of the way that Hashem reveals Himself from afar. Sometimes like you can see the beauty of a mountain by standing at a distance than like being on the mountain kind of thing. And then you get close, and then having seen the totality of it, you can experience both aspects. It's actually quite a nice mashal. I just thought of that. Right? By standing far away, that's not bad. By standing far away, you can grasp the whole thing. Then when you're on the mountain, you can hold those two realities. You're experiencing the beauty of the mountain, but you've also had the distance to be able to see the thing sort of face to face. Yeah.
But I also thought that in Olam HaBa you experience all the pleasure, the rays and everything, but the Torah Masim Tovim Olam Hazeh, you actually grasp the essence of Hashem, His own Ratzon, His.
This is a difficult aspect of the Tanya. This is a difficult aspect of the Tanya for the reason that we just spoke about. Because the Tanya makes it very clear that this world is the Iker, and that Imamish, in this world, the Torah says, Ivraya de Malka, like you're literally grasping the essence, and in Olam HaBa he says it's just a Ziv. So that becomes a little bit challenging, right? From the perspective of, so much of Chazal are orienting toward Olam HaBa, who has a chelik in Olam HaBa, who doesn't have a chelik, who cares? I should ask who has a chelik in Olam Hazeh. There is an answer to this question. It's a little bit delicate. I've spoken about this also in the past. I'll mention it very briefly now. It doesn't help completely, but it helps a little bit. And this comes from, and again, I mamash was just thinking about this today because I was looking at that book again. I saw this quoted in a book, let's say for a book, and he quoted it from Rabbi Salanter, and I cannot find it inside the Sefer. And I looked and looked and looked and looked, and Imamish quotes, he doesn't just quote it, he translates a whole essay that he claims is in the Sefer, and I literally cannot find it. So either he had a different edition, I don't think he made it up, but okay, but this is what he says, and it's actually an idea that I also saw from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So both. Comment on the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos also that says, Ha'olam hazeh doime le'prazdar b'fnei hatraklin. Right? This world is compared, on a simple level, it means this world is a long hallway that leads to the traklin, that leads to the great hall. And the Mishnah tells us, Haskein atzmecha be'prazdar kadesha tikanes hatraklin. Prepare yourself in the prazdar, prepare yourself in the hallway, so that you will then be able to get into the great hall. So on a simple reading of that Mishnah, which is the way the commentaries, the Mefarshim understand it, we are speaking about a linear experience of time. Right? Olam hazeh means our lifetime in this world. It's like you're walking down a hallway the whole time. And then, presumably, Olam HaBa, which gets vague also because Olam HaBa doesn't actually, that's not where you go when we die. Right? We go to Olam HaNeshamas. Olam HaBa is what's going to happen after the Elav HaShvi, right? After the whole world is mitukan, and then there's a radical shift. And the different Mefarshim understand that differently. But let's just say, hey, waiting and having tikkunim in the prazdar until you get to the traklin. Rav Yisrael Salanter is quoted as having said, and I saw it also from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Schusam Yagan Aleinu, where he said we're learning it wrong. It isn't a linear experience like you're walking down a long hallway through your life until the end you enter into the hall. When it says Olam hazeh doma leprazdar, it means like layers of an onion. Our experience on the face of this worldliness is potentially a corridor into a deeper dimension of reality. Now, meaning in any given moment. Haskin atzmecha beprazdar. If we do the tikkunim that we need to do to live lives of kedusha and God consciousness, then kedesha tikanes letraklin. Then in every experience, drinking a cup of water, eating a regala, making a l'chaim, whatever aspect of the physical world we're engaged with, that is a potential entranceway to the hall. In this sense, Olam Hazeh and Olam HaBa are not two different dimensions, like now we're in Olam Hazeh and one day we'll be in Olam HaBa. They're seen as concentric circles. Olam HaBa is here now. This is hinted to in the Gemara, which one of the Tanoim was blessing his students, maybe your mayor, I can't remember, and he told him, you should be blessed, Olam Chatireh Bechayecha. Which is a strange lashon. You should see your Olam, a reference to Olam HaBa, Bechayecha, while you're still alive. Right? Karva al nafshi, David HaMelech says, come close to my soul. We're going to sing in the L'chadaydi tomorrow night. Ga'ala, right? Redeem me. Redeem me. Because when you're in exile, what do you mean, redeem me? Yeah, within exile, you could be redeemed. Within Olam Hazeh, you could be in Olam HaBa. Because this whole Olam Hazeh is just a series of corridors. You choose what dimension of reality you want to live in. If you want to take this world super seriously and see the world only on the outside, so then you'll be in the corridor. But this world could potentially be, every aspect of it, an open portal to a deeper layer of reality. So that fixes this slightly. In other words, you can say that what the Baal Tanya is saying, that you grasp in this realm, mamish, through the mitzvahs, you grasp atzmos, that's a bechina of Olam HaBa in Olam Hazeh. You are accessing in that minute Olam HaBa. Right? That's the gilui of the Torah that, like the Nefesh HaChaim says, breaks through all of reality until it manifests itself here and you're engaging with pure getlecha, pure godliness. And after we leave the world, I don't know, it's a different experience. Remember that the Baal Tanya elsewhere in Likutei Torah writes in a number of places that the mitzvahs are screens through which we're able to perceive the divine light. So these two things are not separate. The Ziv HaShechina that we experience there is also through the mitzvahs. It's just not mitzvahs that we can do anymore, it's mitzvahs that we have already done. And now, paradoxically, because usually we think of the mitzvahs as the reward, right? Like, you know, the mitzvahs turn out to be nothing other than just armor to be able to handle the light. So everybody goes up into the light, whatever these things mean. It's a metaphor, right? Obviously. The people who have more mitzvahs have more screens to be able to perceive the light. It is on account of too much light that heaven becomes hell. This is similar to what the Gemara in Avodah Zarah says right in the beginning, that La'asad Lavai, Hashem is going to take the Chama min Artika, remove the sun from its sheath, and it will be healing for the tzaddikim, and it will be burning up for the people who don't have those vessels. It's the same idea. And again, just 1 second, it also applies to our experience in this world. Because again, it goes back to the Gilui Shechina. Nothing objective changes. The world is the world. It offers manifold experiences. You choose what experience you want to have in this world. You choose. Do you want to live in a constricted space where we're just stuck in the anxiety of constricted consciousness and only seeing the externals and being stuck in the limited space? Or do we want to utilize that potentially limited experience as a portal into a deeper reality by building vessels, by engaging with the mitzvahs, each of which, again, like the Kalim and the Mishkan, is reflecting a different aspect of godliness. Okay, I understand Hashem a little bit differently now through the halachos and the mitzvahs of Chanukah than I do with the mitzvahs of Sukkah, and Sukkah from Lulav, and Daled Minim from Pesach, and Matzah, and Mar, and the Seder. That's a new revelation. Wow, okay, so what is Pesach, and how does that differ from the revelation of God on Purim? And what is that energy by Tisha B'Av, right? As I go through the Jewish tradition, it's all godliness unfolded. And the more that I engage with that tradition, the deeper that I'm able to reflect on what these things mean. And I go with emunah to be able to look beyond the surface and access all of what it has to avail me. Then yeah, when my neshama goes up to Shamayim, I have those vessels with which to be able to perceive the light. Otherwise, again, it's paradoxical. The light is even more powerful. But it's like trying to look at the sun without the sunglasses. It'll be damaging, chas v'shalom. Okay? Yeah, question?
I think there's like some kind of aspect of these sunglasses being known as rose-tinted spectacles.
Can be, yeah. That's a metaphor that we basically, it's like a saying to say that a person looks at the world in a positive way. That's exactly the same idea, right? In other words, we get to choose which glasses we're looking at the world through. Do we want to look at the world through Olam Hazeh glasses, like this world is just, or do we want to say, Olam chater b'chayecha, I'm already living in Olam HaBa. I find Hashem everywhere. I was putting my, baby to sleep tonight, and just stroking his cheek, and just like in that moment, it's godliness interacting with godliness. Here I am, a manifestation of the 10 spheros, soul in a body, stroking the face of another manifestation of a miniature 10 spheros. Like, what do you mean Olam? What do you mean this world? There's no this world. It's all Elokus. It is all godliness. The distinction between Kodesh and Chal is imagined. This is all Kedusha. It could also be totally Chal. It depends what eyes you use to look at it. Okay? That's the teaching that we're saying over here. And that's why it's in the context of Pikudei HaMishkan that we learn about this remez of Avodas HaLeviim, which is the Gevura Biyadi Samar ben Aaron HaKoyin. And that's the possibility of connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world. I think we'll leave it for now, okay? And the next piece is a little bit longer. And that's already a lot to think about and chew on and contemplate and meditate on. Okay?
ואתה האב שלי שכל כך אוהב אותי האב שלי מלך חי וקיים על כל נשימה שאני